Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating historical puzzle. How is it that the largest, most advanced fleet the world had ever seen just disappeared, while a tiny, scrappy expedition completely changed the course of history? Well, the answer reveals a powerful truth about what really drives human progress. Okay, let's just start with the hardware because the difference is just wild. On the left, that massive bar, that's the flagship of the Chinese Admiral Zheng He from way back in the early 1400s. It was a behemoth, basically a floating city. And then on the right, you see that tiny little sliver? That's the Santa Maria, Christopher Columbus's main ship, almost 100 years later. I mean, the difference in scale is just mind-blowing. And if you think the ships are a mismatch, check out the manpower. Zheng He commanded a force of 28,000 people across his entire fleet. Now, to put that in perspective, Columbus sailed with a grand total of 90 men. 90. That's not even a crew. That's like a rounding error in the Chinese Armada. So this brings us to the big central question of this whole explainer. I mean, by all logic, the bigger, more advanced fleet should have been the one to reshape the globe, right? But that's not what happened. How on earth did this tiny, almost comically small expedition have such an outsized, massive global impact, while the grandest fleet the world had ever seen just kind of vanished? To solve this mystery, we first have to give the giant its due. We really need to understand the incredible machine that was Ming China's treasure fleet. Seriously, technologically, organizationally, these guys were light years ahead of pretty much everyone else on the planet at the time.
And get this wasn't just a one-time thing. This timeline shows that from 1405 all the way to 1430, for almost 3 decades, the Ming Dynasty launched 7 of these enormous expeditions. This was a sustained, massive, state-sponsored effort, a true display of the empire's incredible power and wealth. But here is the absolute crucial point. These voyages were a completely top-down affair. They were started by the emperor, they were driven by the shifting winds of court politics, and they were run by a giant centralized government machine. And what that means is their fate rested entirely in the hands of a few powerful people. And so just as quickly as they began, a new emperor came to power, the political mood changed, and poof, an official decree ended the whole thing. The ships were literally left to rot. Now, let's flip the coin and look at our underdog, Columbus. See, his journey wasn't some grand state project. It was much more like a high-risk, high-reward startup pitch that he shopped around to the royal courts of Europe. So unlike Zheng He, who was a high-ranking government official just following orders, Columbus was basically an entrepreneur. He had a business plan, a super risky one for sure, to find a new trade route. And he spent years trying to get investors to buy into it. The whole motivation wasn't prestige, it was profit. And this is where you see a totally different model take shape. There wasn't one single source of truth or funding. Instead, the risk and, the potential reward was spread out among a bunch of different people. You had the Spanish monarchs who wanted a return on their investment. You had private bankers sharing the risk. You had merchants hoping for new trade routes. And even Columbus and his crew had a personal stake in the voyage's success. Everybody had skin in the game. Okay, so this brings us to the real heart of the matter. The answer to our puzzle isn't really about the size of the ships or the number of sailors. It's about the fundamental design of the economic and political systems that launched them in the first place. This chart just makes it crystal clear. Over in Ming China, decision-making was totally centralized. One guy, the emperor, could literally shut the whole thing down with the stroke of a pen. But in Europe, it was distributed. It was market-driven. If the Spanish said no, hey, Columbus could go pitch the Portuguese. The motivation in China was politics and prestige. In Europe, it was all about profit. And that made China's system incredibly fragile, a single point of failure, while Europe's was resilient. It was self-perpetuating. Someone was always looking for the next big score. And then Europe came up with an institutional innovation that basically put this model on steroids: the joint stock company. This was a total game changer. It allowed pretty much anyone, not just kings or rich bankers, but regular merchants, everyday citizens, to buy a small piece of a venture. It basically democratized investment, spreading the risks so thin and so wide that it fueled an absolute explosion of exploration. Okay, let's zoom out and really think about the bigger lesson here, because this isn't just a fun story about old ships. It's a fundamental principle about what actually drives innovation. And believe me, it is incredibly relevant today. This idea, It's not new. It was famously described by the economist Adam Smith. He basically argued that the combined, self-interested decisions of tons of different individuals, all competing and cooperating in a marketplace, consistently deliver better results than even the smartest centralized plan. The wisdom of the crowd, in a way, beats the command of the bureaucrat.
So what this all boils down to is this. Ming China had a clear, undeniable technological advantage. Their ships were better, their navigation was top-notch, but Renaissance Europe had something much, much more powerful, an institutional advantage. They had a system, a set of rules, of incentives that empowered and rewarded countless individuals to go out, explore, invest, compete, and take huge risks.
And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Zheng He's fleet was an incredible display of centralized power that commanded the seas for a moment. But it was the messy, chaotic, competitive, entrepreneurial spirit of the West, powered by a system that couldn't be shut down by a single person's decree, that ultimately went on to reshape the entire world. It just goes to show you that in the long run, the rules of the game you're playing often matter a whole lot more than the size of your starting stack.